Please help me welcome to the stage co-founder of Summit, Jeff Rosenthal, and the host of the Great Simplification podcast, Nate Hagens.
How are we doing, everybody? Hey, Nate.
Greetings.
So, not at the beach, here at the talk. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you guys showing up. I will say this talk is the Nate amuse-bouche. He's doing another talk on Sunday with his presentation and materials, and it will be incredible. And I do suggest that you guys check that out as well. Nate, thanks for being here.
Great to be here, Jeff. Thank you. And the talk that I'm giving on Sunday is spent 20 years making it, so I hope you can show up.
And the way I like to describe Nate to people that hadn't heard of him or weren't familiar with his work is you essentially have a unified field theory of energy in the economy and society. And as Nate said, it is a 20-year body of work. And maybe we just begin from the top. Can you tell us what is the Great Simplification?
Well, we live in a world of parts and processes, and our current culture views the world as things instead of connections. And I recently, until 3 years ago, taught a class at the University of Minnesota called Reality 101, a survey of the human predicament. But it was, a better name might have been the things we didn't know, but always knew, but didn't know we knew. And it's how energy, human behavior, neuroscience, climate, economics all fit together. Most people in our society view the world from a technology, money, and politics lens, but underpinning all that is energy that underpins our entire society and ecology, the impact of the living world that supports our systems. And we don't realize it, but we swim in a world of energy without being aware of it, and we just pay the monetary cost of it without realizing how ubiquitous it is in our lives. So we've just went through a 200-year period of more and more and more energy use, which when you combine it with machines, fossil energy is indistinguishable from magic for what it can do for us. A barrel of oil does 4.5 years of Jeff Rise or any of your physical labor in the real world. And our society uses 100 billion barrel of oil equivalents of oil, coal, and natural gas every year. So we have roughly 500 billion human workers combined with machines powering our lifestyles. The average person in the United States has 63 electrical devices plugged in their house every day, drawing electricity even if they're turned off. We just don't realize this. And the issue is that when humans innovate, which we always have and we always will, we innovate by creating new connections. And each of those connections requires energy. And so, long story short to your question, the Great Simplification is what happens when we can no longer increase the amount of energy that human society uses globally at scale at an affordable cost that we're used to and our institutions were built on. And we can get into why I think that's in the next decade or so. But the Great Simplification means that as energy gets more expensive and less available, we're not going to be able to increase this complexity that we've just spent the last few generations exploding on the planet. And we're going to have to simplify, which means less material consumption, more local economies, probably more physical labor replacing the things that machines used to do. And this, we can talk about the AI's influence on this as well, but the Great Simplification doesn't have to be a bad thing. But I think it's from an ecological perspective somewhat inevitable and coming in the coming decade or so.
And we have Peter Diamandis coming, who's going to talk to us about abundance. Isn't AI going to enable abundance for all? Talk to us about you touched on it slightly, but What are your opinions on sort of this forthcoming revolution that we see, the first chapters of right now?
I mentioned energy briefly. The other aspect is ecology. I think most people at Summit are aware of climate change. There's also ocean issues. There's also plastics and endocrine disrupting chemicals and drop in sperm count and testosterone due to the outgassing of phthalates from our plastics and such. And so a lot of people say, oh, AI is going to have us join the exponential age. We've just lived through an exponential age. And I think a lot of the tech focus, we need tech. We need tech in service of the future. But from a macro standpoint, AI is just going to accelerate all the extractive, ecological damaging processes in the world. From a micro standpoint, an AI company makes sense. It will make profits. It will do things faster and better. But from a macro standpoint, we're just shoveling more fuel into a runaway train at a global level. So I personally think AI is going to be a disaster for the environment unless we change our objectives. Because AI is subservient to GDP and growth as our cultural objective. And so any contribution to productivity gets funneled back into this global consumptive maw. But if we were able to culturally change our objective away from unbridled economic growth, then AI could actually do a lot of things that improve our well-being, protect nature, do regenerative processes, et cetera. But on its current path, I'm quite skeptical.
Do you think we'll change that path?
I obviously think there's some chance we change the path, otherwise I wouldn't have agreed to come here.
Okay, fair enough.
I think we're unlikely to change en masse as humans. I think we will change when we're forced to. And that's the work, is changing the initial conditions now of the future that's coming and having people informed and inspired to play a role. I don't know, Jeff. I don't think so, but I'm hopeful.
And a key of Nate's work is that moment when we are forced to, and I want to get to that and why you think that is in the next decade. Perhaps you can set the foundation by explaining Jevons paradox.
Okay, so efficiency is a good thing. When we make a process more efficient, like lighting, we can make lights use 10% less energy and we still get light. But when that happens, there's something called a rebound effect that we saved 10%, but we spent 6 or 8% more on other things that require lighting. There's something even more profound, which is happening in the real world now, which is called the backfire effect, which is when you save 10% on lighting, you actually use more than 10% on lighting overall. So humans get more efficient every year in our global economy by around 1.2%. We learn how to use energy better because of technology. But since 1990, we've increased the efficiency of our things in the world by 36%, but in that same time, we've increased our energy consumption 63%. Because when you save money or a process gets more efficient, you use more of it, or you take the savings and go to Walmart and buy some stuff that was made in China using energy. So as long as GDP is the goal, more productivity from AI results in this backfire effect that the whole world uses more energy and stuff. If air conditioners were suddenly half price in India or in the United States, we would buy twice as many of them, or more people could afford them, et cetera. So efficiency doesn't have to be a bad thing, but it's a bad thing on an exponential growth trajectory for a human culture.
So would you say that applies to clean energy as well?
Clean energy is an interesting topic. I think 84% of our global energy right now is coal, oil, and natural gas, and it's been around that same level for the last 40 years. So there is no renewable energy transition right now. There's an addition. We're using record amounts of coal in the world, And so we're adding solar and wind and geothermal and things like that on top. So there is no replacement per se at a global level. This doesn't always have to be, but I think there is this myth that, oh, let's get rid of the bad energy and replace it with the good, and so far that's not been happening. But yes, Jevons paradox, the backfire effect, applies to anything that we add to our global GDP in that manner.
So tell us why you think this great simplification, this forcing function moment will happen within the next decade. And maybe you can just dig in a little further on what that truly means, because you touched on it lightly, but what is the carbon pulse? What is this moment, and why is it happening?
Well, the carbon pulse is this few hundred-year period that we're all alive in, where humans are drawing down fossil energy millions of times faster than it was sequestered by geological processes. Like literally, it's hundreds of million years of our ancestors, really, that we're burning at so rapidly now. And we're kind of asleep because we assume that it's interest that will be here all the time, but it's really principle that we're drawing down. And this is our cultural story. All of our technological dreams about the future happen now in an era where we've all lived through, so have our parents, more energy every single year, with the exception of 2009 financial crisis and a couple of years in the 1970s and 1930s. So we have this implicit assumption that energy will always be available, and it's like our natural right. The United States is one of the largest oil producers in the world, but right now 60% of the oil that we extract, is a better term than produce, is shale oil. Shale oil is the source rock. It's where all the other oil originated, and there's nothing left after that. And so what ends up happening is when you drill a shale well, it depletes by 80 to 90% in the first year. Then you have to drill another one and another one. So we have drilled more wells in the United States than the rest of the world combined, and there's a lot left, but there's not unlimited amounts left. And so what ends up happening is our natural resource is kind of going like this, our ecosystems are going like this, and our monetary claims on all this stuff are going like this. No matter who won the election, Trump or Harris, we're going to print money and go more into debt. But that debt is a claim on real things. On every time you all spend a peso or a dollar, that is a claim on energy somewhere in the system. Everything we do in our lives that contributes to GDP requires energy to move or refine or deliver or manufacture. And it's been so cheap that we're kind of blind to it. So my general thesis is that we're creating too many financial claims on a shrinking underlying biophysical reality, and that rubber band stretch between the two is going to happen in the next decade or so. And so what I refer to that moment as a bend, not break. That's the task of society, is how do we bend during this situation, during this couple decade process, as opposed to break, because break would be bad. That makes sense?
Totally. Do you think, because often when we talk about conserving and sustainability, we think about it in our society, but we're not really considering the billions of people in the global south who have yet to had HVAC and 2 automobiles and all sort of like the creature comforts that we're now suggesting that our society could potentially live without or in a smaller manner. Do you think that they'll have access to these things? Do you think that they'll be willing to sacrifice a future without this? Or do you feel like we'll have haves and have-nots around the world when it comes to power access?
This is why my talks aren't really popular, because there are no easy answers to these questions. And yet it's my belief that we have to have these discussions. And in the 48 hours I've been here, I've met quite a few of you, and there's this like human spirit of people just smile and meet each other here. And so this is the type of audience that can hear this message. And I don't know the answer to that. I think a lot of people, when they hear stories like this, they immediately emotionally think about themselves and their children and their direct family, of course, that's natural. But then there's other people, there's other countries, there's other species. There's 10 million species we share the planet with. If we hit 3 degrees Celsius, it's estimated we will lose half of the species on Earth. And then there's future generations, not only on how much energy they're going to have, but how viable are the ecosystems going to be. So I think it's going to be a combination of things. I think the global north is going to have a steeper drop in our consumption levels, and the global south will also drop, but not as much. But here's the thing about the future. I don't know what's going to happen, and what I've spent my last 20 years, I used to work on Wall Street. 20 years ago, I was managing money for billionaires. That was my job. And I started to realize these things about oil's going to deplete in my lifetime. We don't pay the cost of externalities and the prices. Oil is like pixie dust magically on what it does for us. Holy crap. And I care about the natural world, so I quit. And I've been studying this for this whole time. And I really do think that we need more people aware of how all these things fit together. But I don't say, oh, this is going to happen. I view the world as a probability distribution with certain possibilities under the distribution that change every day based on what I learn about nuclear energy or who gets elected or maybe if I'm in a good mood or something. But I change the distribution. And I think that the midpoint of the distribution is a great simplification, which is an economic retreat from our current levels. But society innovates, and not only with technology, but with social innovation as well, which is another reason I agreed to come here and talk about this, because we don't need all this energy and stuff to be happy. The average American, the average person in the United States, consumes 212,000 kilocalories a day worth of energy. And in our food, we consume 2,000, or in my case, 3,000. So we have like almost 100-to-1 buffer on our energy footprint relative to what we really need. This is not a disaster. If I ask you all, what were the best 10 experiences of your life, with the exception of going to Summit events, most of those things did not require a lot of energy or money. They were going to a campfire with your friends or playing cards and having some beers or some time with your dog in the woods. So most of the best things in life don't require all this energy and stuff, but we've been on this treadmill where we're keeping up with the Joneses and the Kardashians with more stuff and more bling and more flex, and we're kind of miserable as a society. I mean, there's a median and a mean, and there are some people that are very happy and doing very well. But as a society, things aren't really working out right now.
And you mentioned Trump versus Harris. Is there a significant, you think, impact in the speed or the story along that curve as you're tracking that's going to change based on this new administration?
There is, but we're being recorded, so I'm going to half answer.
That camera is actually just for show, not a real camera.
I have hopes that things will be better than people fear, but the story that I'm talking about, which is that humanity has, in an emergent way, become an energy-hungry, blind, economic superorganism where we as individuals have outsourced our wisdom to the financial markets. And as individuals, as small businesses, as nation states, we go through our lives maximizing profits. And those profits are linked to energy. And the energy use has an ecological impact. And there is no one in control. There is no one driving the bus. And this is an emergent phenomenon that we are all downstream of. This is not our fault. But we're alive during this and we're a part of it. So from that vantage point, Trump and Harris are not too distinguishable because they both want to get more energy and print more money and do more growth, because not growing would be bad as well, right? So the biggest thing that I care about is the natural world and the other species and the oceans. And now that Trump is not allowing, we're pulling out of all the agreements in the Paris Accord and not able, we don't know what's going to happen with the EPA, but I can't imagine they're going to suddenly be champions for climate and ocean issues. But we can understand why that is, because the solutions promoted for those issues are not popular. And by the way, in the United States, we have an additional problem. If I give presentations in Europe or in Asia or in Australia, everyone understands and agrees about climate change. In the United States, half of the population thinks it's either a socialist hoax or the scientists are being bought off or something. It's a real issue. So Jeff thinks of me as an energy expert. I'm really not. I'm just a systems synthesizer. And I think energy is a critical part that most people misunderstand. But ecology is the main underpinning of our lives and our futures. And I think we're ecology blind as well.
Well, appreciate it, Nate. I wouldn't just say that I think of you as only an energy expert. I think of you as a whole person. You're not just one thing to me. I really appreciate it. I think, one of the things that you said to me about, you mentioned no one is driving the bus. You were like, well, arguing with this phenomenon in our socioeconomic structure is like being angry at a forest fire.
Yeah.
There's no one home to be mad at. This is just us at our best as a society moving forward. And you've thought about this more than anyone else really in the world. So I'm curious, like when you do think about point solutions or things that we can do or things that we can, encourage or start focusing our time or attention on, you don't want to leave us here just like this is us at our best and it's not good enough. I'm curious, like what do you think are areas in which people should be leaning into either in business or policy or philanthropy? What does have an impact today?
I have a 90-minute talk planned on Sunday, and about 30 to 40 minutes of it are on solutions, or rather responses, at various levels, at a global level, at a civic society level, at an innovator technology level, and at the end, individuals. There is not one answer or I don't even like the word solution, because there are no solutions to what we face. There are responses, and we're going to need millions of responses. I have categories I present to philanthropists in the United States and Europe, and I have a list of 10 categories: pro-social prepping, Goldilocks technology, which is those things that aren't too hot, like drones dropping off donuts at an 8-year-old's birthday party, and not too cold, like Stone Age tools, but something in the middle that is ecologically aware, energy aware, more local supply chains. So Goldilocks technology is important. Advanced policy, which is our governments and our population are not really ready for this conversation because the answers and the direction are too politically unpalatable. So we need to think 2 or 3 steps ahead and do scenarios and try to have people envisioning, squinting and kind of seeing what this looks like and working on it ahead of time. There's so much to say. As individuals, we don't really need all this energy and stuff to be happy. But when you see someone else just buying a new speedboat or an extra house or whatever, you're like, well, I want to be like Jim. So we have to have a growing up, a maturity to be an ecological adult of understanding. And there's a difference between knowing about something and knowing it in your body. And I think it's going to take a person, and then 5, and then 100, and then 1,000,000 that recognize these things and acts as rocks in the river locally in their communities and their businesses, as examples, as leaders. So ultimately, I am grieving for the story that society and the media have told us about the future, but I've grieved over the last 20 years for this. And because of that, I'm much more hopeful about the future being better than what I see as the default. And when I meet with people, so much of this resonates with so many people. I mean, then the other issue, which we haven't talked about, I mean, you mentioned Trump and Harris, but underpinning that is the social media algorithms, the polarization. People don't know what's true. I mean, when I'm speaking to you now, you might get a sense in your gut that you might not agree with all of what I'm saying, but it feels somewhat right to you until you go back and check, like on the internet feed, and you'll find things that counterbalance this. I mean, it's amazing to me the curation on X versus Google. If you Google things the same on those two and follow it, there's almost no overlap. So there is a huge bifurcation in the information that our society is receiving. And if we don't agree on the information, how can we have discussions about what matters and what's real and what's important and what do we do about it? So I don't know how to answer that.
Wonderful. And again, I really just wanted this to be a primer to, no, I mean, listen, it's not wonderful, the information. I think it's great that Nate is spelling this out. And for me, I found it to be incredibly empowering. Understanding sort of the reality in which we sit in. And the thing about the truth is you know it when you hear it. And we actually were at an event where Nate spoke, and it was like 60 of the leading climate founders and board members of Exxon and BP and, all the big investors in, say, climate tech. And our assumption was these people are going to run out of the room or, hate this basically. And everybody was thrilled. They were like, thank you, this is amazing. And it allows us to have a foundation to build from that is informed in reality.
And suddenly that's happening. I can't imagine me coming to Summit from what I've seen of the agenda and the people 5 years ago, but we are part now of a species level conversation. We know where we came from, how we got here, what we need, what our skills are, what our natural resource balance sheet is, and we're starting to have this conversation about the future. So my hope is passing the baton to more pro-social, pro-future humans, and we'll see what happens. I have so much more to say. I guess this was a good summary.
How much time do we have as Carrie or somebody? It's 45. So I typically don't.
Well, that was only 30 minutes.
Yeah, we're ripping. So we don't normally do Q&A like from the audience. But again, my point here was really just to introduce this conversation. My hope is that you guys do make it to the Sunday talk where Nate has his full presentation. He'll actually walk you through this in a much more sentient way that I can help guide. But there's some folks here that have a couple questions. We'd love to hear from you. And maybe we can pass the mic around.
Dumb question as usual. Tony Greenberg, Impact Soul. Will the cost of kilowatt hour go up or down in the next 10 years relative to energy as it relates to energy exchange in the universe as per your discipline?
For the United States or for the world?
You can segment. You can answer all your own questions.
Yeah. I think there will be several forces at work. I think we're going to go towards nuclear. I think nuclear is going to be part of the mix. It's going to have to be because solar and wind aren't going to suffice. I mean, AI is just such an energy hog that there's going to be huge, huge demand for the exponential increase in data and large language models. And I think this is a serious bottleneck. I would expect it's going to go up because of complexity, because fossil energy depletion, because of the fact that 50% of the world's exportable oil is produced by bricks and 70% comes through the Strait of Hormuz every day, and there's all kinds of choke points and things like that. So again, one of the issues with kilowatt hours and renewable energy is it's electricity, and only 20% of our energy is electricity globally. I think in the next few years, it's a coin flip. In the next 10 years, it's going up in cost.
For 20 years, we've had flat global energy demand, 1% to 2% growth every year. And now, due to AI, just the reshoring and reindustrialization of global industry, and then decarbonization as a wide priority, you have inflecting demand globally and relatively fixed supply. So just two nuclear examples. When Constellation announced that they were turning 3 Mile Island back on, this is about a month ago, With Microsoft, their stock price went up 30%, $16 billion in one day. 2 weeks ago, Microsoft gave guidance and announced that they would not be able to build data centers at the pace that they want to. And it's not because of access to the chips, it's access to the power. Their stock price went down 6%, $180 billion in market cap in one day. This is the arms race, this is the input to their output, and these are the biggest companies in the world.
So if the bulk of the issue is around energy, I mean, you pointed to a number of societal issues and environmental issues, but it seems like so much comes back to energy. Why is it not reasonable to think that that 84% number just shifts to a much, much smaller number over a period of time, and urgency accelerates that period of time, and then a lot of the issues and concerns go away as there's more nuclear, there's more solar, there's more wind, there's geothermal, whatever it may be, and it may be something that pressure creates something that we're not even envisioning now, but that addresses the energy issue. And does that solve a lot of the problems, potentially?
I don't think energy is the fundamental issue. The fundamental issue is ecological overshoot, which is 8 billion people consuming and competing for more pecuniary things. So it's a human behavior issue. Energy will be one of the limiting constraints. So far, we've not reduced from 84%, and we've been trying for 40 years. I think we are eventually headed to 50%, 100% renewable energy, but at a much smaller scale, and there's the rub. So GDP and all our pensions and our financial claims are linked to a growing economy. So I think you're right, we will have distributed energy, and fossil fuels might be less than 84%, but the question there is, what is the size of the United States economy and the global economy? I expect it'll be smaller. There's two women in the second row here.
I got the mic. Can I ask a question? Or
Yeah, go for it.
sorry. First, thanks for researching this. Thanks for talking about it. Does Bitcoin help fix this? Like, does a reliance, if the global economy starts to move towards more like Austrian economics principles, does that help counteract some of the unchecked, like debt-based growth that seems to be the enemy here of what you're saying, if I'm hearing it correctly?
So I don't want to speak too much more, because then fewer people will show up to my talk on Sunday. But here's my view on Bitcoin. I think it's probably going to go up a lot. I don't think it fixes this problem that I'm talking about. What it's going to do is, people that are afraid of central banks in the world printing more and more money, they want an anchor of something physical, and that's something that's transportable without lugging big suitcases and such. So I think Bitcoin will go up. But what's going to happen is there's going to be a massive wealth inequality issue, that a few people will be trillionaires and a lot of people don't have any Bitcoin at all. And still, when you spend Bitcoin or spend dollars, it's still a call on energy. Now, I think a lot of people wrongly criticize the mining of Bitcoin as being energy intensive. Bitcoin does help with using flared gas and other things like that, but the conventional monetary system is worse. When we create money, there's no link to how much oil there is or forests or how many dolphins there are. It's just a pen stroke by the government or by a commercial bank. So Bitcoin is better than that. I just don't see how the whole world, it could be part, but I don't, there's so many issues that I'd rather talk about than Bitcoin. I do think it's a coin flip whether it goes to $1 million or zero. So it's at 90 grand, so it's probably a good investment, but I don't look at it as any savior to the issues that I've raised.
Oh, sorry. Here I am. Hi.
Hi.
So,
and then over here.
Oh.
No, go ahead.
Okay, wonderful. So this might be a bit provocative, but it sounds almost as though you're talking about consumptionism kind of going back in a box, which I think is a bit hard to really visualize, right, in terms of people consuming less. And if you look at the use cases in Europe and other places, right, you talked about the percentages of energy being used here from gas and coal and whatnot. In Europe, I think it's about 20% is currently nuclear, using small modular reactors. Is there anything that they've done that could somehow come to the US? I know it's very contentious, this concept, but I mean, it's been used. So would love your thoughts on that.
We being Europe?
Excuse me? No, here in the US. Wait, where are we? Oh, sorry. In the United States. We're in Mexico right now. Apologies.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not saying that we're going to voluntarily say, hey, we need to consume less. I think it's going to be foisted upon us by financial pressures. I mean, already, this was one of the reasons Trump won, is a lot of people are already economically hurting in the United States. So I think there's a lot of learnings that can happen on energy. In Europe, they put a massive gas tax. So in Europe, gasoline is $10 a gallon. In the United States, it's $4. So that means people have smaller cars and they have more public transport, and they're not as big of energy hogs. And we're going to, since we have so much oil, we're going to learn that lesson close to last. But look at the average distance between cities in the United States. I mean, not to sound too neo-Luddite-ish, but the best invention ever by humans was the electric bike from an efficiency standpoint. So I don't know that I answered your question, but those are my quick thoughts.
Hi, Nate. Hi, Jeff. So you're talking about...
Jenny, the one person in the room I know.
It's an honor. So you talked about human behaviors, and you also talked about the objective function. So I really appreciate the situational assessment of sort of what is imminent because of the dynamics of the energy sector. But for me, the underlying driver are the economic incentives. And we spoke a little bit about last night about this sort of imminent contraction and change in our consumptive behaviors. But then you also made this statement where, like, I don't think capitalism is the problem. And I want to dig into this with you over the next couple of days, but I'm really curious what your thoughts are, because for me, we don't get out of this mess without changing the economic incentives at a foundational level.
Capitalism is in service of the economic superorganism, which started in ancestral times when the climate stabilized and warmed in all different places around the earth, and we started to grow food and have agricultural surplus, and that created hierarchy. Fast forward, we went around the planet, we had found fossil energy, then we created fractional reserve banking and digital currencies. Now we have AI. So the dynamic that set all those things in motion predates capitalism. I agree with you that, well, capitalism might be one thing if we paid the right prices. We're paying pennies on the dollar for the main inputs to our economies. So if we had a tax, not only on carbon, but on anything non-renewable on human timescales, it would give innovators the best price signal. Oh, I have to use less of this. I have to use more labor and things that are renewable. You know, that would change things for the better. It would give the right incentives, as you say. But how do we put that in motion? We just elected, you know, I mean, how does this happen in the political system? It's this catch-22. And I think one way is by educating people and understanding these things. Yeah, but we can dive in.
I also think there's a distinction between capitalism and a market economy. And so I think that might be also just the interpretation of the language. So I look forward to that conversation with you.
Okay, great. Let's do a couple more and then we'll let... Okay, you and then the lady 2 rows behind you, go.
Hi, so my question was actually really connected to your question and your answer about the pricing, because we've been hearing that the pricing is detached from the real cost of producing things. And there's so many areas in our lives that are not covered. They're not a part of the market. They're
like
not
being a
priced.
mother.
Where's that?
Like being a mother.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like you know, in mental health and other areas, there is lack of money because it's not covered by the market. It's just not priced. Like I heard this example of a whale that is alive is not like worth nothing because we don't put a price on it, right? So it has a value when it's dead. So have you, over the 20 years you've been concerned about it, have you seen any shift, or have you had any thoughts of how that can be changed? How can we add new elements to the market so that we can rebalance, pricing?
I think it actually starts with a shift in consciousness at the level of an individual. And I know that sounds a little woo, but I think we as humans have to change our value system, or you have to expect some benevolent dictator to make some rules about what you just described. I think we're waking up to this reality, and we have to express it with our behaviors and our conversations. And I have seen that hugely since COVID. Since the Ukraine war, people are more aware of energy, what's going on in Israel and Gaza. People are wondering, what the hell are we doing? So it's all bubbling up, the question that you just asked. And 10 years ago, not as much. So what I've noticed in 20 years is suddenly, because the world has converged on this moment, people are feeling it and aware of it and want to talk about it. As far as like how do we actually do it, I don't know. I'm trying to lay the foundation of how all the things fit together in a non-prescriptive, apolitical way, and just get more people involved in the conversation.
All right, thank you.
2 rows behind you. Thank you. And I'm here until Wednesday, so if people want to flag me down, I'm happy to talk more.
Thank you for all of this. This is really interesting. I had a question in regards to economic growth. It seems like we are constantly bound to grow economically in order to have our systems work, and yet this economic growth is also what is making everything seem so dystopian in the future, and just seems like we can't win no matter what we do. Is there a way to think about, or is there like a think tank type situation around how we could economically shrink while still keeping prosperity for everyone alive and well? Like, how could we kind of responsibly consider economic shrinking to initiate that and to want that, but keep everyone happy?
There's huge conversations and groups studying this. You're talking about contraction and convergence. There's a huge degrowth movement which recognizes the ills of economic growth, and they want to degrow the material size of the economy while keeping the hedonic, spiritual, basic needs growing. I don't agree with that because I don't think we're going to tighten our belts voluntarily. There's no evidence that's going to happen. So I think we're going to be pedal to the metal until we hit a wall, and then there's going to be a sharp drop, and that's what we need to prepare for in the years or maybe decade ahead. And then from there, hopefully there will be better policies that more align with it. You and the previous question are, that's the work, is figuring out, anticipating what might happen, and when it happens, have constituency and different ideas that work.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you all. Thank you, Nate.
Thank you.